Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to a special live edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist. Lawmakers in Washington have averted a government shutdown with just a few hours to spare. President Joe Biden signed the measure late last night. It keeps the government funded through November 17th. There's funding for disaster relief and the FAA, but there's no funding for border security or aid to Ukraine. Here's how Indiana's delegation voted. In the House, Republicans Jim Baird, Larry Bucshon, and Aaron Houchin joined Democrats Frank Mervan and Andre Carson in the yes column. Jim Banks, Greg Pence, Victoria Spartz, and Rudy Yakum voted against the measure. In the Senate, Mike Braun voted against it, while Todd Young voted in favor. And Congresswoman Victoria Spartz joins us now live. She just returned from Washington. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So you voted for the plan that Speaker McCarthy put forth on Friday. You voted against the temporary funding measure that the House passed yesterday and President Biden signed into law. What was it about this measure that flipped you from the yes column to the no column?
Well, the most important thing that this TR is missing, gives more money, actually more money than Nancy Pelosi gave to Biden, but doesn't have a plan to deal with our crushing debt. You know, the other plan did have debt commission, so at least next year, when we have debt still increase, we can have a serious conversation how we're going to save our country. That is a very important national security issue, but unfortunately, Republicans didn't have a backbone to put it forward.
Would that have been worth shutting down the government over, though?
Listen, I don't think Biden would shut down the government. I don't think it's unreasonable for us actually not to govern by crises, but leadership. This was very reasonable proposal. Let's get together, two parties. Let's have a conversation. It's bicameral, bipartisan plan, and actually have a plan. Spend a year communicating to the American people, you know, and not being afraid to challenge big machine with big money and big oligopolies that being pretty healthy while American people getting destroyed by the inflation. And I think that is a very serious crisis it's going to be faced in our country. And I don't think it's unreasonable for us to actually spend time governing, not politicking.
So now we've reset the clock. We've got until November 17th. What specifically are you going to be looking for in any spending plan that gets put forth between now and then?
As I said, my biggest priorities are going to be border security and debt commission. I think we need to secure our border. It's a huge national security crisis, but we also need to deal with debt. People don't realize that this inflation is going to destroy middle class and low income people. And we'll have very, very wealthy people sitting close to Washington, D.C. machine and everyone else equally poor. That's what really socialism is. And I think we're on a fast track to socialism if we don't get, stronger to start to pushing back on them. But there are very healthy pacts that they send into a lot of people. And I think these people my colleagues need to start remember that they're only ones who lobby for the people. No one else is.
Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida this morning is saying that he will attempt to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker this week. Where do you stand on that? Would you be in support of that?
Listen, I'm open-minded. I'm not be very happy, when we celebrate that we gave more money than Nancy Pelosi, but not as much as Biden want. When we told him, give him a blank check till the end of the year and our debt and say, you can spend as much as you want. We didn't even put limitation. I think, Democrats are probably pretty happy, so I'm not sure if Democrats dislike Kevin McCarthy. They might not actually go with Matt Gaetz, but I'll be open-minded because I want to see some leadership from Kevin. And I told him that leadership takes courage, backbone, vision, but also time, and you cannot do this crises and last second try to, do things in the bill. So we'll see.
We keep going through this every few years. I've covered shutdowns a couple times going back to the 2014 shutdown. Is this anywhere to govern?
No, and I think, the country needs a real leadership and governance. We have some serious issues, and it takes time and discussion and deliberation, and no one wants to challenge the status quo because, unfortunately, challenge the status quo is tough. You will have to drag some big monopolists to the table and say enough is enough. People don't realize that a big part of this budget doesn't go to we the people. We're not doing accountability and transparency. 70% of our budget is not even authorized by Congress. I said, what are we doing there? They don't care about our ladders out the bridge. No one cares about that. everyone is all about money. And when we don't do proper oversight, the other branches running wild. And it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrats, it's all the same. Congress abandoned its responsibility and duty to the American people.
Does your party bear some responsibility here? It seems like when we do have these shutdowns, it's always with a Republican House and a Democratic president.
Well, listen, it's a bad idea to do it on the Democrat president because he will make it as painful as possible, right? You know, that's just unfortunate. You know, everyone is playing politics. But unfortunately, I'll be honest with you, we don't have enough visionary and leaders in our party that willing to govern because it's tough. It's easy to do politicking, collect checks, blame other side, and be reelected and do nothing. And I think American people are tired from them. So we usually have very few people that willing to push on the leadership, but we haven't had good leadership for a very long time, our party. But I'm responsible for it, so this is my responsibility to push my leadership to do better, because ultimately I can blame other party as much as I want, but we're in charge now and we have to deliver for the people.
This budget deal leaves out aid to Ukraine. What do you make of that decision?
Listen, I think, you know, I was one of the few people a year ago demanding proper oversight. We also need to better communicate why it is in our national interest. We also need to do much faster. You know, not have, you know, with the aid, not have this never-ending wars. So I think it's a serious conversation, but also, you know, these issues, domestic and international issues, are not mutually exclusive. President Biden needs to secure our own border too. I mean, this is #1 priority. He should worry about that. So I think this is going to be a very healthy discussion. You know, Republicans are willing to support Ukrainian people fighting the war, but we also need to make sure that we protect American people, because I'll be honest with you, if we don't save these republics, there is no hope for anyone else, including Ukrainians. We will have countries like Russia and China taking over the world, and it's not going to be a pretty world.
Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, I know it's been a very long week. Thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Congressman Andre Carson put out a statement late last night. He says, while it's not a permanent solution, it's a step forward for the American people. I'll keep working to put people over politics and compromise over chaos. Coming up, I'll show you why a major expansion of state public health funding means new services for one central Indiana county. Welcome back. Public health officials in one county have big plans for unprecedented state funding. This is from the expansion of public health spending lawmakers approved earlier this year. I stopped by the Shelby County Health Department to see what they have in store.
Hello, Miss Hazel. We're going to go right here.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Sarah Thurman is giving out the first vaccine of the day.
This is her hepatitis B. Okay.
Thurman is a public health nurse at the Shelby County Health Department.
Good. All done. All done. When I first hired on, that school liaison grant was a 2-year program. So that's at the end of that 2 years, you don't really know if the job will still be available or not. So with this funding that's coming on, that's a big relief.
This spring, the General Assembly passed a law that provides millions of dollars in additional public health funding for counties that agree to provide a uniform set of basic services. The program is called Health First Indiana. Commissioners in all but 6 of Indiana's 92 counties voted to accept the extra funding for 2024. In Shelby County, officials plan to make permanent Thurman's job and a vital records assistant, and hire a full-time food safety inspector. They also plan to expand services such as immunizations and testing for sexually transmitted infections.
They were very receptive, the county council and the commissioner. They liked the idea. They knew how short-staffed we were after the COVID.
Director Robert Lewis has worked for the department since 1986. He says the money will help him provide services he's wanted for decades.
It means they're getting more value for their taxpayers' money. They're getting the services. Before, if you had a complaint, we might be a week or 2 out to get out to them.
The funding varies based on a county's population and needs. Shelby County will receive a little less than $500,000 when the money arrives on January 1st. Lewis says having more staff means each person on his payroll can focus on their jobs rather than covering for someone else. Now that Thurman knows she can stick around, She's focusing on services such as maternal health, disease tracing, and making bleed kits for every classroom in the county.
We have a lot of exciting things that we're going to be doing with this grant coming in, and we're happy and we're glad to share it.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team talks the funding deal, the latest presidential debate, and much more. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Kip Tew and Republican Tom John. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning. Let's begin with the temporary funding deal. There's money for disaster relief, but not for border security or Ukraine. Tom, is this a failure to govern?
Well, I actually think it's a triumph of leadership for Kevin McCarthy. Politics is the art of the possible. It's been the saying for a long, long time, and he kept things open and going. The fact is he's managing a difficult caucus, and there are a lot of issues on which people disagree, and he bought time for a lot of these issues to be discussed going forward. So I really think it was a triumph by him, and frankly avoided what would have been catastrophic for Republicans and catastrophic for U.S. citizens.
Kip, our country is now $33 trillion in debt. Do Republicans in Congress have a point about cutting spending?
Well, they may have a point, but they haven't done anything to do it over the course of the time they've been in power. During the Donald Trump administration, they exploded the debt, and then the only time they seem to care about the debt is when they don't have a president in power. So they're not to be taken seriously when it comes to this. And all they do is play politics with our government. I mean, yeah, this week was another display of the Republican Party at the national level just being broken. Frankly, they're just broken. Kevin McCarthy did the only thing he could do. He turned to Democrats to help solve his problem. And actually, I agree with Tom to this extent. It was smart of him to do so, and I wish he'd do it all the time. We would get much better and a lot more done if he just stopped listening to the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Getzes, and the Lauren Boeberts of the world and tried to govern from the middle, because that's where most of Americans want stuff to happen.
And you mentioned Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. He is now saying this morning that he will try to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker sometime during the week. So this is for both of you. And Kip, we'll lead off with you on this one. Does
Sure.
Kevin McCarthy survive as Speaker of the House?
Well, you can't beat somebody with nobody. And so I don't know who Matt Gaetz is going to use as his stalking horse. If it's him himself, he won't win. So I expect that McCarthy will survive it because he doesn't have somebody else to put up against Kevin McCarthy at this point. But it's really a ridiculous sideshow. And it just proves that the Republican Party at the national level is broken. They're in factions that don't come together, can't come together because they've got some incredibly big nut jobs trying to run their party.
Tom, what's your read on this, particularly given, for example, some of what we heard from Congresswoman Spartz earlier? She would not commit one way or another, yes or no, on this.
For one thing on this, there are a couple of points I think we need to go into since Kip's been discussing the dysfunctionality of the Republican Party. But let's start with Kevin McCarthy. He's been emboldened. He's said in statements, "Come and get me." And I think the answer is he's feeling that he has shown his leadership. This is not the first issue that he's navigated a difficult place and managed to get through to a compromise that actually made sense for the moment and kept things moving forward. The fact is that prior to this, other leadership in the House has not done that and left Republicans stranded. Now, let's talk about the dysfunctionality of Washington, D.C. We had a Democrat congressperson, Jamal Bowman, who pulled a fire alarm to try and delay this vote yesterday once a deal was being put on the table, once McCarthy was trying to lead and govern, to disrupt this vote and to put it off. We have the Democrats who, yeah, they're happy to hear about governing from the middle as long as the middle is everything they want, but they never want to compromise. If we have to talk
We compromised yesterday, Tom.
Excuse me?
We compromised yesterday. What are you talking about? We wanted Ukraine funding, and it wasn't in there. That was a
compromised
compromise.
by not getting everything you want and taking 3/4 of it and not compromising on the issues you didn't want. That's hardly compromise. And at the end of the day, McCarthy took the deal he could take, to not damage the U.S. citizens. But the fact of the matter is that the Democrat Party has tried to play from the position that they're in charge and they're the ones that are going to dictate the rules. And you have people that are then pulling pedantic antics like pulling fire alarms. That's not what I would call a functioning party in the interest of the USA.
We're going to have to move on.
Well, I agree with that.
Gentlemen,
okay.
We're going to have to move on for too much longer. Briefly, though, question for each of you. How likely is it we will have a permanent spending deal on or before November 17th? Tom?
Well, I guess that depends on your definition of permanent. I think they'll pass something again, but what it looks like, who knows? I mean, for the next 14 months, I expect everything to involve brinksmanship between both parties, and we're going to see what actually comes out of it. But I think there will be a deal because I do think Republicans have learned the lesson that if you're the ones that shut down, you don't win.
Kip, I'll let you respond, and then we'll move on.
I completely agree with Tom, believe it or not. I don't think we'll have a permanent solution because nothing's ever permanent. But I do think that it'll be, again, like in the last few hours on the 17th, they may have to do another CR, which is a continuing resolution to continue to fund the government for a temporary amount of time. I don't see a permanent solution when you have divided government.
I want to turn now to the second Republican primary debate Wednesday night. Kip, is Donald Trump's strategy of staying away from the debates working?
Well, the second debate was a I can't say the word blank show. It was just yelling over each other. It didn't look like there was an adult on the stage, and folks who needed to sort of move didn't really move the needle. Mike Pence is the closest thing to an adult, and then there's Chris Christie, but the rest of them just are in the middle of a food fight. I think this time it was good for Donald Trump not to show up. I thought he made a mistake the first time, but there were a lot fewer people paying attention this time. I don't know whether it was the night or whether it was some other reason, but people were not tuned in, and that's the death knell for them.
Tom, based on his performance in the first two debates, can Mike Pence break out from the field?
The ultimate question here, frankly, is will the Republican Party try to do what the Democrat Party did to move President Biden forward in 2020? Is there a coalition that comes together and says, okay, this is somebody we can all get behind? If you don't, you're going to continue to have a food fight, right? I mean, Kip's absolutely right, and everybody there is trying to scream for attention, trying to get in their position. I think Mike Pence could be that guy. But the question is whether you have the National Republican leadership from the donors and the people in the RNC to actually step forward and pick him and say, this is the person that we believe provides the best contrast to both President Trump in the primary and President Biden in the general.
I do want to turn to local politics in the little time that we have left. Indianapolis mayoral candidate Jefferson Shreve unveiled his plan to revitalize downtown. He said that he would use his real estate background to help bring businesses and residents back to downtown. Got about a minute left here. Kip, is this the approach the city needs?
Well, I think the current approach is pretty darn good. We've got cranes in the ground all over downtown. We have announced hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in downtown Indianapolis. So I think things are fine and moving in the right direction. Look, Jefferson Shreve was a very good businessman, no question about it. He's got good real estate background. I'm sure he would do a fine job with continuing the momentum of downtown, but he's not going to win.
I got about 30 seconds left here. I got to give Tom the last word here.
Anyone that thinks that walks around downtown and thinks it's better off than it was 8 years ago should vote for Joe Hogsett. But the fact is, Jefferson Shreve is somebody who's very bright, has built a great company based on real estate, and he will bring back the success of downtown and much of the growth that, frankly, Joe Hogsett's taking credit for that Greg
We'll
Ballard
have to leave it there.
place.
Kip and Tom, thanks for joining us this morning. We'll be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. Be sure to check out our podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.